Bryant Goulding and Bob Bonder from Rhinegeist. These guys are awesome. I've had many beers. Yeah, a round of applause for these guys. I've had many beers with Bryant at a bunch of different events, and I think after a few of them one night, I said, you know, you got to come to Brooklyn and you got to speak. And we hatched some crazy ideas up, and here you are. So I had this whole thing written about what do you get when you combine a bunch of bearded brewers riding around Cincinnati on mini scooters and a riff on the popular Macklemore tune Downtown. Apparently 40,000 views on YouTube is what you get. I won't go into too much detail. I'll let these guys do the talking, but they've done a really, really incredible job in a few short years of building a brand that resonates with consumers, that people in the industry respect and admire. The liquid is fantastic. I can say that because I've had a lot of your beers. And you guys are doing a phenomenal job. And you're creating a great culture in the process. But culture is just one component of what makes Rhinegeist so successful. Since launching in 2013, they've grown from 2,000 barrels to more than 31,000 last year, and they're aiming for about somewhere in the 50s this year, 50,000 barrels that is. And that's an amount that few craft brewers actually will reach in such a short period of time. So it's pretty phenomenal. And that kind of growth, although it's occurred, seemingly overnight, was not something that happened by chance. Bob and Bryant really sharpened their focus on the most important parts of their business and constantly worked to strengthen areas that needed improving. And in doing so, they've built a sales strategy and a long-term growth plan that other companies seeking similar results could and perhaps should emulate. And not just because these guys make awesome music videos either. These guys epitomize what it means to be successful entrepreneurs in today's rapidly evolving craft beer environment, and I'm honored to have them here today. So take it away, guys. Cheers.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. I'm Bob Bonder. This is Bryant.
Howdy.
We're the co-founders of Rhinegeist. Thank you for having us and for the flattering words, half of which are true and half of which we just actually got pretty lucky. So we're going to start and tell you about the history of our brewery and do so pretty quickly, and a bit of our background too, and then a little bit about our beers, our brands, and then we'll just let Chris barrage us with some of the tougher questions that we'll probably ever get. So background-wise, I actually grew up in New York, in Rockland County, went to school upstate, moved to the West Village after college, lived in the typical bathroom-sized apartment, and was doing strategy and marketing analytics consulting, which is really not fun. So, you're basically spending your whole life traveling around, working for other companies, building giant presentations, going in, and your end goal is a giant thing, a giant stack of paper or a giant presentation. There's no product, there's nothing tangible, there's no end of the day, like, I can feel this, I can touch this, and it's fucking awesome. It's like, okay, cool, I just spent that 6 months doing that, and now they're going to send me someplace else. So basically, the whole time I was doing that, I was looking for a way out. I was looking to leave and do something that could be mine, something that, I could really cherish. And the first idea was I was going to move to Brazil, and I was going to open up a luxury bed and breakfast in Brazil. That seemed like a logical idea, coming from New York and having no money. And this is like 10 years ago. There was no Zika, the president hadn't been impeached, but it had its own share of issues 10 years ago too. So struggled to convince anybody to actually do that alongside me. And when it fell through, I decided to make some other sort of radical change and at least move. So I jumped coasts and moved without ever having been to San Francisco, out to San Francisco. Kept doing consulting and met Bryant. And Bryant was working for a different company. We hired him, and we started working together consulting. And every day we'd drive to work, and beautiful drive where the whole focus of the talk was how can we go do things that we're actually passionate about and things that we'd truly enjoy. And I wound up jumping ship and starting a coffee roasting company, and Bryant wound up getting into beer. I'll let him tell you about that. But in opening a coffee roasting company, I also said, I can't do this in San Francisco. I can't afford it. I can't move back to Manhattan and do it there. I can't afford it. I obviously can't do it in Brazil. So where can I go do this, and where can it work? And use some of the tool sets that we had from our consulting days to say, where is the best place? Where is economic growth? Where is real estate underutilized? Where are there the right people who would love craft trends, but they're underserved and it's a bunch of chains? And it actually wound up being between Cincinnati and North Carolina, and just sort of fell in love with Cincy. wonderful culture. People are super friendly, and it was completely underserved. You go into the downtown, and it was just literally a bunch of chains and nothing local, but all the right people there it was just ripe for change. So moved there about 8 years ago, started the coffee company, opened a bunch of stores, closed a bunch of stores, failed at that in every different sort of way possible, but learned a hell of a lot about what's meaningful to me, the way I want to run a business, and knew that despite it not working, that I would never go back to doing consulting or never go back to working for somebody else, that this was the thing. Entrepreneurship is just too much fun. Eventually opened a wine bar and then had this idea of beer. And a big part of that is in Cincinnati, back in the 1800s, there were 40 breweries. 40,000, mostly Germans, landed in Cincinnati and just started opening up breweries one after the other in these beautiful historic buildings. And they opened up these tours across the street from me where you go into these underground tunnels below all the old brewery buildings. And yet, nothing was functioning in any of these buildings. And all the beer on tap at every one of our local bars was from another state. So something seemed illogical, and the cultural side of my brain and the business side of my brain said, shit, somebody's got to do something. Let's do it. And at that point, I called up Bryant. Bryant was working for Dogfish at the time, and tried to con him into coming out to Cincinnati, and he's like, no fucking way, I'm going to move to Cincinnati. I live in San Francisco. You've seen San Francisco. You've lived here. Like, why would I possibly move to Cincinnati? And we brought him, and that's probably him dancing on the top of one of our vans. And the city is super dynamic. It has all this wonderful old architecture still remaining from the 1800s, a lot of these beautiful old brewery buildings, and the culture's just exploding. It's this renaissance of the city. And I think I'll let him tell you about his thoughts after he came and visited. But roped him into staying on my couch for a few days, and then staying on my couch for a few months, and then staying in Cincinnati forever. And Jim, our head brewer there, was a PhD chemist for Eli Lilly, who was a super nerdy, successful home brewer, and he used to come into my coffee shops, and I got to know him that way. And eventually, he had jumped ship from Lilly and was working for Sun King in Indy, but engaged to a woman in Cincy, and it was just like kismet, perfect timing. Strolled into my coffee shops one day, and we got to talking, and he's like, I'm going to move to Cincy. And I'm like, I'm going to open a brewery. And the combination of this team has just been really magical for us because we're all very different people.
So when Bob and I quit consulting, I went to South America, soaked my head in the beauty of Torres del Paine and a bunch of different countries down there, and came back and said, I'm really going to get a beer job. Started working for Anderson Valley, shipped my grandfather's car out, because in San Francisco you don't need a car, but if you're selling beer, you generally find out how many kegs you can fit into whatever vehicle you're driving. Started selling beer in 4 counties with Anderson Valley, and then Dogfish had called, and I'd met Sam a million years ago when I was in college in Connecticut at a Rotary Chili function where he came and flipped over a Frisbee and started chopping up apricots, and I was like, whoa, what could I do in this industry? And ended up getting to manage their West Coast operations where they had never had a sales rep before. So I was running around 5 states managing 18 wholesalers. When Bob called me, he didn't know it was my birthday and didn't say happy birthday. He said, you got to come to Cincinnati, build a brewery. I said, you're absolutely out of your mind. But I'll come visit. I like seeing new places. I've never been to Cincy. From what you say, it's probably an intriguing place. And got there, and over the Rhine is this amazing creative epicenter. There's beards, there's bicycles, there's a lot of great stuff going on. There's blue chip companies, Procter & Gamble, Kroger's based there. So there's this kind of beautiful combustive mix for a brewery to open up and bring delicious beer to people that generations ago all had family members working in these breweries. So we started looking for 10,000 square feet of space, and that's pretty easy in a town that's kind of has enough inventory like Cincinnati. And we looked at 4 or 5 places, and then there was this other space. It was 200,000 square feet, and it was an old brewery. It was the old Christian Moerlein bottling plant. Turns out they were doing 300,000 barrels out of that before Prohibition. So we were like, yeah, let's just go see this old brewery building. So we started walking through in all these tunnels and walking through and stepped through where those posters are in the murals, stepped through into that big cavernous space, and we were both struck and speechless. I've never been in an old brewery that arrested me so viscerally, and I think when you've been in hundreds of breweries and you're excited or making a decision on the shelf, there's that visceral emotional experience, and I'm kind of romantic about this, but it really seizes you. And when people walk into that space today, they kind of do a curtsy and they don't they can't believe they're in such a big space. So we started rapping about, all right, what would our brewery name be? Well, let's go with something that harkens back to heritage and yet speaks to kind of modernity. So we came up with Rhinegeist, which means ghost of the Rhine or spirit of the Rhine. Go to the next slide. Did I get there yet? Yeah. So our brand, Rhinegeist means ghost of the Rhine, spirit of the Rhine, something highly guttural. What kind of beers are we going to make? German beers, right? No. We fell in love with hops in San Francisco, and that was what we were going to bring to a market that we felt like was underserved for the hoppy beers and the exploration with hops. We basically wanted to balance out. That's our head brewer and our assistant brewer that were the two of the original five that started with us, that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, balance of beauty and a focus on quality as well as experimentative innovation and eccentricity. There's so many brands out there that we really wanted a clean and iconic style. That skull drop in the middle of a glass of our brand is the drop of history in every batch. We are literally in an old brewery that we're bringing back to life. This skeleton of 112,000 square feet we're breathing life back into, yet if you're there at 2 a.m, it's pretty freaky. So it's not an alien, it's the drop of history that runs in our veins. And that clean, iconic branding, I feel like is necessary with over, a brewery and a half opens up every day these days. And it's simple and it's memorable and it's something that's easy to get excited about. Our branding is also, it's our people. And we had put together a deck to get there of what are our analog personalities. And we had like Salvador Dali and Hemingway and Hunter Thompson and who we thought we were going to be as a brand. And so we have a little clip that describes briefly kind of who we are as a teaser for our 3rd anniversary party, which is coming up at the end of this month. But we figured we would not bore you with a lot of words, but play with a little multimedia magic.
Is it working?
Maybe.
Maybe.
All right, so we've got a cool building and a cool brand. I love it. How do we sell that? Well, you can self-distribute in Ohio, and it's a beautiful thing. You can self-distribute up to 1 million barrels, which would be tough, and we don't plan to. But we started out with one sales guy, me, going out and telling people about our beer and sampling them with growlers, and even before that, pre-selling them on the notion that we're going to make really exciting West Coast inspired beer, hoppy and sessionable. We're going to experiment with a bunch of different styles. No one believed that we were actually going to get a brewery open in over the Rhine. And then when we actually got beer and it was delicious, people got excited about it. Cincinnati's a really close-knit community, so we started driving initially a used van from Sun King that the side door would fall off occasionally if you took a hard left turn, spitting kegs out onto the street, which was a nice way to meet your neighbors. And we were really hands-on. There's a lot of wholesalers that do a great job out there. And having grown up and cut my teeth on the West Coast where it's really competitive, there's a ton of suppliers in key markets. I was out there hustling, trying to get your attention, trying to sell you whatever you would put on draft to prove that our beer would sell and that we could get excited about it. And we had one sales guy. If I could get a sales manager or a staff trained and sampled out on it, they would get excited. Our sales team grew. So I was looking at it one account at a time. We then hired a school teacher on the 3rd day of school, and she quit her job and started with us, and really focused on building that intimate connection with our accounts, because in the long run, it's a human deciding which beer they're going to put on. It's a human deciding which beer they're going to order, and that impact is really critical. You can't just, I feel like the days are gone where you can just roll out a territory, send high quality beer, and it sells itself. I'm not a believer in that. So we built up self-distribution as a focus on premise. We had our canning line open. Since the day we opened, we didn't launch cans until Super Bowl weekend, 8 months after. That focus on draft really focused on the tough, challenging focus of earning handles. We started running ourselves out of core beers, which I swore we would never do. I worked at Dogfish Head during Brewmasters, and we were very short on beer, and 4 million people tuned in to watch us, and it was like you had to put your mouth guard in to go talk to accounts because we didn't have enough. And with core beers, we didn't want to run out at all, and the ballpark called, and 6 weeks in, we're like, we can watch the Reds and drink our beer? Yes, we'll give you that. And then you want 38 more kegs this week? Well, let's brew hoppy pale ale so that we can strategically cannibalize ourselves and get more beer to the ballpark, because they're not going to take anything but truth and run with that. We've continued to hire outside the industry. We've continued to focus on passion and really informing our sales team with what makes us spectacular, what makes each beer spectacular, and we're really hands-on with what we do in sales. I think that makes us a better supplier when we work with wholesalers, and I certainly know it makes us a very competitive wholesaler in our home market. We did 2,000 barrels draft only in 6 months. So we opened in 13. In 14, we did 11,000 barrels. Last year, we did 31,470. 25,000 of those were self-distributed out of Cincinnati. We opened a wholesaler called River Ghost in Kentucky to distribute our beers and potentially other craft beers, wine and spirits. The law changed, so we had to transition out of that business and shifted the beer distribution rights to Heidelberg. They built a craft sales team. We continued to grow. We did like 30,000 CEs with them. They're now on pace for somewhere close to 200,000 CEs. So there's this passion and energy that I feel like we try and bring into a market and belief in our beers. And we launched 76 different styles last year, which is mayhem. Wholesalers are like, But if we have a lot of great relationships with those rotational accounts, that's where a lot of the velocity is. So we've found that if we can express what our beers are to accounts that know what they want, we can find a hole. We are also only our own wholesaler. So we launch a beer and a half a week so that we have something interesting to talk about in our accounts in Cincinnati. We also opened up a warehouse in Columbus. That's where that 54-footer goes. It also goes up to Boston, where we launched cider to learn, because you learn more from failure than you do success. And in your home market where things are going well, it's sometimes hard to tease out what you can do better. So we went to Boston, where we could get our teeth kicked in strategically and learn how tough it is to sell when no one's been in your building. They don't know people who work in our brewery. They don't see the vans driving around town. And how do we articulate that? And this is part of it. We'll show. Back to you.
Yeah, I'll take it. So all along the way, there's this big looming issue of, shit, how do we keep up? How do we grow? And how do we grow in terms of distribution? How do we grow in terms of production? How do we strategically use our space the right way? And all of those things needed to come together. From the second we opened our doors, and we thought we'd have 150 people a week come through the brewery, 50 of them probably being like the neighboring hookers. And instead, we had like 2,500 people come in day one. And then it just didn't stop, and we started to realize, shit, we better react, or we're just going to be plateaued for a really long time. And so we immediately started buying up tanks and immediately started to reconsider our plan and say, we basically burned our business plan and said, okay, we're going to need to, we were leasing 20,000 square feet of this gigantic building and said, we probably need to buy the building. And we probably need to rip out the floor over there and build a new brew house and, expand and use every element of the space that we possibly can to house all the people from the community that want to engage with our brand. And so too early to be able to actually pull this off financially, a year and a half in, we're saying, well, we need to somehow come around $10 million, and we also need to build this 60-barrel brew house. And while we're at it, we might as well build a wedding space, and we might as well build a giant roof deck, because, we're out raising money. Might as well do it all at once, right? And tried to find the right balance financially to pull that off, and got, really lucky that we have a great group of investors from the beginning that were there as sort of mentors to us as well. Just local folks in the community that we targeted because they were engaged with the community, because they were sitting on the boards of the arts organizations or ran branding agencies. And they were really, really helpful to our growth plan. And then distribution-wise, we tried to do what Bryant was saying, and we went and opened another distribution company in order to distribute everything. Because we have a lot of fun on that side of the business. And unfortunately, quirky 3-tier laws got in our way there, and we'll probably get in our way of opening more distributorships in other states going forward. But we continue to focus as close to home as possible, and I think we're going to saturate out our state. This year, if we do 50,000 plus barrels or something, 40,000 will probably be self-distributed, and that's a huge focus for us. But probably the biggest single focus for this growth is our culture. And it's one of those things that's impossible to capture. It's one of those things you can't put in a fucking business plan. It's one of those things you never learn in doing consulting, right? But it's one of those things that happened early for us. And we realized what we have here when it was 5 people, what we have when it was 30 people, now what we have when it's 150 is the single most important thing to making this work. And there's this really, really fine balance between growing fast and growing intelligently and maintaining excitement in that culture, right? If you push the right amount, everybody's excited. You're achieving awesome things in the industry, you're keeping your quality where it needs to be, and everybody's driven, and everybody's having fun in that competitive drive. If you push just a little bit too far, it goes from fun to stressful. People start quitting, there's a lot of churn, quality goes down, things erode. So we're always stepping back and trying to focus on, what do we need to do internally to retain that culture? And, we do plenty and we cherish our people, and that is the single biggest reason I think we've been able to achieve what we've done thus far.
So as a little kicker, I was at 7 o'clock at night kind of finishing, everyone goes home and I can think straight because I'm easily distracted. And Nate, our production manager who runs the spreadsheet that informs sales forecasting and kind of works with the cog that then brews it, came in kind of sheepishly with his computer, and our graphic design guy who also does freelance, makes videos, and his off time, and said, hey, we've been doing this project and it's kind of getting out of hand and we want to use brewery resources to do it. And they sat me down and showed me a rough cut of what you guys are about to see. And I was bowled over and speechless, which is rare, and loved it and said, yes, 2 thumbs up, do whatever you need to. We're full bore. So this was a little video that came out of after one of our sales directors' weddings, seeing this inspiring music video translated into Rhinegeist terminology and rap, and then repurposed by our internal team.
Rolled to the bar with my boy, said, hit bartender's like, what up, need a bucket? Honestly, was thinking something local. She said, I got the one for you right here. Ooh, it's so tasty. 10 quick sips, careful not to get shwasty. To another world, does this beer take me? What am I drinking? Got my heart racing, drinking Rhinegeist. Cruising through the city, tiptoeing on Elm Pass Finley. Pulled up, ain't no valet, fresh wax. On my stash, I'm ready, dope. My crew is dank, and all we need is an ice cold drink. Get me up these stairs, benches, no chairs. Hell of a space, fresh hops in the air. I'ma sniff that, sip that, pause a little chit chat. Chairs at the door, you don't need a wristband, dope. I got 1 pint, it's a fresh beer. On my best buds, like the scene here. I like Rhinegeist, like the roof deck. Now hold up a sec, they read my paycheck. Geisting around the whole town. One friend is like, we should probably slow down. It's only 4 o'clock, damn. Chill the f*** out. Take yourself home and lay the hell down. I only had 1 Rhinegeist, I would give it to you. Give it to you. 2 40-barrel tanks. Girl, what a wonderful view. Wonderful view. There's flavor to this player. Flavor for you. Flavor for you. We are Cincy made, and we'll always be true. Always be true.
Rhinegeist! 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 Look at this cathedral space. Good times with friends, my favorite place. Have you ever felt the cold embrace? It's so good, can't feel my face. Rhinegeist! Welcome to the tap room. We're happy to have you. Grab yourself a fresh brew. Rhinegeist! Treat yourself to craft beer. Don't ever forget, dear, you can order cider here at Rhinegeist. Rhinegeist!
Couch time.
So that's the culture of Rhinegeist, huh?
2-minute summary.
Did you ride your scooter here? It would play well in Brooklyn.
Yeah, we've got a lot of beards.
Yeah. So you talked about the sort of striking a fine balance of growing too quickly and growing just the right amount where people are engaged and excited to work for you, and the business doesn't erode, like you said. How have you guys been able to do it?
I'll give one really great example that we learned a lot from was we decided to self-distribute in Columbus. Columbus is a city about hour and a half, hour 45 minutes away from Cincinnati. We built a warehouse there, or there was a building we leased about 20,000 square feet, bought a freight truck, started running it up there. But the hardest part of doing it wasn't physically doing it, and we're physically doing it pretty well. The hardest part is, even with it being an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes away, retaining that heart, that cultural heart that built everything that we did was really difficult. Just maintaining the same level of relationship and engagement with the brand and the home and the core was really tricky. So that was a big learning, and since then we've sort of dialed back. And we've dialed back the way that we're going to expand in other markets. We're going to focus more locally and regionally. And we've dialed back our thoughts on expanding that distribution and employee network further as well, so that we can retain things closer to home.
Bryant, beyond the beards and the scooters, what makes Rhinegeist different and relevant from other fast-growing craft breweries out there?
Self-distribution is a big cultural muscle. In our sales meetings every Friday, which we're religious about, we have a distribution manager that sits there and tells us how the salespeople are being sloppy or harming what efficiency would look like in his universe. And I think that synergy and communication is really critical in delivering better customer service to our accounts, which are the customers that we care a lot about, as well as the people that buy the beer. But that self-distribution kind of focuses us and sticks our nose in any mistakes that we make, and it's also a great way to not lose sight on the feedback that you're getting from the market. If you brew a beer called Squirt, nobody wants to sell that beer and no one wants to drink that beer. So change the name. And that feedback we're kind of forced to feed naturally. We try and be a little eccentric, and sometimes we can go a little too far, and we learn from that. But I think that there's a general playfulness that is part of working for an entrepreneurial company, that you have access to the vision and our accessibility when we get tied up in certain strategic things, which happens when you're running a business, can crowd out. When I'm hyperventilating and stressed out and meeting from meeting, I'm not diving into the distribution drivers meeting at 4 o'clock on Thursdays and high-fiving them all because they're all having pizza and catching them up on our sales strategy, but that matters to them. And so carving out space for us to relax a little bit and high-five everybody is kind of a critical thing I think I've learned. Like, I'm not being lazy, this is really fun, it's just really important.
Right. For the brewers in the audience that maybe don't have the benefit of self-distribution or aren't making that a significant part of their business plan, what's the takeaway? You obviously kind of tied everything that you just mentioned back to self-distribution, but for the brewers that can't do that, how do they continue to maintain that entrepreneurial spirit and excite employees within their organization and work hard without that component?
I think you work with a wholesaler partner in a way that you dive harder, you plan better, you communicate more. Their sales team can count on you as an asset to their organization. You follow up when you say you're going to do something, and you bring passion to accounts that they can't because they've got a cornucopia of brands and they show up every week. They might have a great relationship and have leverage there, but you can be the crazy, zany, passionate character that believes more about Rhinegeist or your brand than anything, and that's the biggest asset to the smallest wholesaler or the biggest wholesaler. And I think annual business planning is important. Quarterly planning to check in and see if that's working is important. Monthly, weekly, really building communication and a relationship with your wholesaler is the best thing that you can do. And there's so many brands out there. If you're not doing it, someone else is. And I feel like having come up in San Francisco, where there are probably over 100 supplier reps in that city, and to come to Ohio, where the wholesalers are doing all the beer selling and there isn't a supplier in sight, it was like, whoa, let's do this.
Right. What's been the biggest mistake that you guys have made? And what did you learn from it? What did you change? What did you correct after you made that mistake?
Wow. I think this ties back into the same sort of stuff. We actually had a couple of our youngest employees. We hired them from this Venture for America program. They came out of schools from outside of Cincinnati, came to Cincy, and sometimes you're 22 and you haven't built up that you're not intimidated, right? You're willing to say whatever. And they basically took us aside and said, guys, you're losing part of that feel. And that was a point in time where we were evaluating New York as an expansion market, which we've now decided not to do. We were traveling a ton, and it really hit home. I mean, two of the youngest kids working at our brewery delivered a message that was like, whoa. And we basically sat down until 7, 8 o'clock that night talking and saying, all right, here's the big things that we need to do before, that whole thing that we just spent a lot of time talking about happens, right? We need to dial it back, and we need to refocus. And, maybe it wasn't the biggest mistake we made, but it was the biggest mistake we almost made in starting to lose that. And, thank God we have a couple 22-year-olds with some balls that spoke up.
Right, but you guys have empowered the folks within your organization to be that way, correct?
Yeah, it's entrepreneurial in that if you have a good idea, you build a business case for it, and if it's worth doing, we'll do it. And we're pretty open source that way.
Is there a risk to, driving the business in that direction, where you're encouraging such entrepreneurial thinking that you worry about retaining talent in a way? Everyone's dealing with millennials, right? How do you keep them satisfied? I'm right on the cusp there, Jeremy. On the cusp. Yeah. But I feel like at the end of this, there's a lot of question marks in terms of competition, and we're now growing into a regional brewery where the little guys are going to gobble up the growth that you've just had, and the big guys are going to squash you with their better means. And at the end of the day, we brew great beer that we love to drink. We have a culture that we're spending time kneading the dough of and allowing to rise and listening to our people. And we're looking for long-term growth. We're 35 years old, I'm almost, and we're looking to do this for the next 20 years. And 15, 20 years from now, if we're at 1% or 5% growth, we can be sitting around our table with all of those people and be really proud of what we're going to do. There's a lot of amazing human capital there in how we go to market, be it distribution, in our tap room, how we educate our staff. And I feel like that's the most satisfying thing. And also what will cut through the noise is our people, our culture, they are our brand in the long run. And when I look at the most successful breweries that have scaled with a permanent impact in markets, it's where I know the people and spread out all across the country that are showing up every day and respected by their peers in this industry. It's a really small industry, and you build a great reputation, and that reverberates.
And I think more than anything, it's what makes it fun. And that's why we got in this in the first place, right? That's why we jumped ship from consulting to do this sort of stuff. This is what makes it fun. This is what makes this fun for us. We want our employees to have that fun too. And if the entrepreneurial atmosphere is our demise, then I can't think of a better way to go out. Yeah. I know we're just out of time here. One sort of final question for you guys. If I would assume that the self-distribution component of your business is sort of your competitive advantage, or at least one of them at this time. So, as well as great startup capital with your group of investors that you mentioned. So, if you had to rebuild your company without those competitive advantages, without the self-distribution piece, and without the great investors that you have to be able to capitalize the things that you do, how would you approach your work in order to create the necessary conditions for success? Yeah. Hire right, focus on quality, treat your people really well, and share in everything with them. And I think and engage with your community and focus close to home. And I think it'll deliver results.
Bryant, would you agree? Something else to add?
Yeah, I mean, we had $0. So at some point, you have to convince someone to believe in you enough to give you dollars to work with. And banks are not that when you're one guy sleeping on a couch and another guy with a coffee shop. So there, you do have to have a plan to get capital. We had none. So that was not a competitive advantage. That was us doing similar things and was just happening up on stage to skeptical Cincinnatians that wanted to see the city win and wanted to see the neighborhood win. And I think looking for that long-term kind of aligned priorities really worked out. We hired a guy who used to install solar panels but moved back to Cincinnati where he grew up to raise his daughter in a better school system than what was available to him in Denver at Montessori. And he was our guy delivering kegs and grew his team. I've got 27 salespeople, and he's got 27 or 30 delivery guys. And the camaraderie, these guys deliver, I forget what he said, but tons, literally tons of beer. each year, each month, every day, and they are proud of doing what they do, and we are proud of them, and that synergy is really, really critical. I don't see that value the same way to the person as in other organizations, and I think that is something that it's all about the people. It's not about us. It's about the greater us.
Right. Well, you guys are doing a fantastic job. Congratulations.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
Thank you.
Cheers. Nice job, man.